Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Sarah. This is my first time showing up here of what I hope to be a few more art videos. Today we're going to do a watercolor pet portrait. I'm a good friend of Cindy's. We do a lot of artwork together. And Cindy's little cat Squirrel passed away this past week, and as a result I wanted to do a little tribute for Squirrel, but also for the channel we're going to show you how I'm going to do that. I am a freelance illustrator and graphic designer. I work often in watercolors, but also digitally and in pencils and markers and a bunch of other little mediums, but watercolors is what I really love to do. And we're going to show you a very limited palette, a little pet portrait, and it's going to be a lot of fun. If it's a little bit jittery, we were planning on doing some filming out at Cindy's place, but as we are currently in a province-wide lockdown right now, we're not allowed. So I have set up a very rudimentary yet effective selfie stick taped to my desk lamp method of filming. It'll do the job, but I don't know how brilliant it's going to turn out. We will hopefully be investing in a little bit more professional equipment in the near future. We're going to start with a reference photo. A lot of really great artists use reference photos or references in one way or another, whether it was to blow up a sketch to put it on a canvas or a mural. I just use my trusty old laser printer and a picture I stole off of Cindy's Instagram. I deliberately picked a reference photo that was not amazing, and the reason for doing that is to show you that you can do it even with a reference photo that's not amazing, but the better the reference, generally the better and more accurate your pet portrait's going to turn out. So what I do with it is I print it out, I have cut it to the size that I want to transfer it onto an artboard for. Whatever you want to do your painting on, whether that's artboard, whether that's watercolor paper, whether that's canvas, you can do that with watercolor. If you're watercoloring on canvas, you want to use watercolor ground first, and your watercolors will behave a little bit differently on each type of paper that you use. You kind of want to play around with it a little bit to see how it's going to work. So I have a piece of watercolor artboard. It's a Canson artboard that I cut down to a size of 5x7. So we're going to flip over our little cat, and we are going to scribble on the back of it with a stick of graphite. Take your artboard. Now, since I've got the reference bigger than the artboard, we're going to flip it over the edge and tape it to the back of it to make sure that it stays where you want it to. And my favorite tool for tracing something onto an artboard or watercolor paper is a good old junky ballpoint pen. The less good the pen, the better it is. Don't ask me why that is, but a good thick pen gives you a nice thick line. Now I am going to mark off a few areas in here that I can see where the light is hitting and where the dark is hitting. And the reason you want to do that is so you can make your paint lighter in some areas and darker in others. It's where the light hits matters. Another thing about doing pet portraits is everything else can be a hot mess express, but if you get the eyes right, you will sell it. It will be a pet portrait that looks accurate and awesome. I always make my eyes a tiny bit bigger than they appear in a photo. So if I'm doing a cat, I usually go up by about 0.5 of a millimeter to 1 millimeter, depends on how big your thing is being. Just a smidge, just a smidge. You go a little bit bigger, exaggerate the eyes a bit, and that's what gives you a focal point. The focal point is what you want people to look at when they look at your painting. When they're looking at it, you want them to engage with it. So whatever that is, whether it's, a painting of boats on the water, you can make them pop out using color, whether it's a painting of a cat, you want people to be looking into the eyes of that cat. We are starting with Winsor Violet, Permanent Magenta, New Gamboge, Turquoise Blue, Leaf Green, and my all-time favorite watercolor that I use on pretty much everything, Payne's Gray. Now you can use a regular old brush if you want, whatever you want to use. I'm going to use a little water-filled brush, which means that I can start painting in the background with just water and go and drop color in afterwards, and that will give it a very nice kind of loose, watery effect, which is pretty fun. You can use just a plain old wet brush to do this. I just like the one with the water already in it because I'm lazy, and if I can cut a corner, I will cut a corner. This is the nice thing about art, is you can do it your way. There's no right or wrong way to do it. If you find a technique that works for you, even if it's not a traditional technique or a technique that, you know, it's technically wrong, if it turns out with the results you want, do it. It's up to you. It's your universe. Do whatever you want. You aren't here having fun, there's not much of a point to doing it. And we're gonna pick up a nice fat round brush. I have two jars of water here, a bowl and a jar. One of them is your clean water, one of them is your dirty water. When you're working with watercolors, you want water that you can pick up that is nice and clean, and you also want water that is dirty so that you can clean your brush thoroughly and then pick up fresh water for your painting. So we're going to start just dropping our first color into the top here. We're going to go into a pink. So a yellow, a pink, a purple, a blue, kind of a turquoisey blue, and a green. You can make this painting. There's plenty of other watercolor tools that I will show in subsequent tutorials, things like masking fluid and watercolor ground and all the different fun things that you can do with that. Always add more color. You can take it away even if you go a little bit too strong. Take a corner of your paper towel and just kind of hit it with it. We're going to do something fun. We're going to soak up a little bit of this excess paint, like I said, at the corner of the paper towel. So if you go a little bit too strong, you can always come back. We're going to use a tool that I find really fun that exists in your own kitchen. There's a bit of salt. We're going to sprinkle that on the background. So the nice thing about watercolors is you can kind of do it in phases. You can pick away at it for a little bit. You hit your watercolor with some colors, and then you come back and you touch it some more. So if I decide I want a color a little bit darker, we can add a little bit more color even after we've put the salt. See what we want to end up to be darker or lighter. But as soon as we're done this, we're gonna walk away for a few minutes. I'm gonna put the fan on because I like my watercolor to dry faster. Watercolor behaves differently depending on where you live, how humid it is on any given day. Oops, I just put my dirty brush in the clean water. Oh well, we'll change that while we're waiting for this to dry. Alrighty, we're coming back for round two. So the colors that we are going to use for the eyes, turquoise blue and our green, and we only want a smidge of both. Cat's eyes are often a pretty pale color. I'm just going to take a smidge of pink because cat's ears tend to be transparent a bit, and you can usually see a bit of light through them, and take a little bit of pink. Now, while I'm pretty happy with the background and how that texture is turning out, I want it to be darker in a few spots, so I'm going to go back in and throw a little bit more color in the spots that I want to be a little bit darker, and then we're going to walk away from it again and let it do what it wants and see what it looks like when we come back in another half an hour. And then we're going to add our darker colors, and then once that dries, we add our ink. I like to use Micron pens because if you need to go back over Micron pens with watercolor, they don't bleed everywhere. However, if you are 100% sure that you've finished adding your colors and you want to just ink it afterwards, you can use just a good old Sharpie pen or whatever other kind of felt tip pen, a pilot pen works really nice. Depends on what you're comfortable with. Use whatever you want. It's fun to venture out of your comfort zone, but if you have a tool that you really, really like and you want to use it over and over again, go for it. Nothing's stopping you. And we're at our next step, which is adding our Payne's Gray. Background should be good and dry by now. You shouldn't see any water spots. You can brush off any excess salt if there's a little bit. Just give it a good brush. You can use a paintbrush if you don't want to use your fingers, but just use it. Push away from your central image so that way it doesn't smear anything into it. We're gonna start with a bit of a lighter Payne's Gray to hit those spots where we said, hey, the light hits that. We're gonna hit with our darkest color. Like I said, it's easy to come back in and add more color. It's a bit harder to take it away. So you want to be careful with how dark you go and where. Watercolor accepts layers pretty well, so it's pretty easy to just add a little more when you need it. You don't really want to overwork the same spot so much. If you overwork it, it tends to kind of chew up the surface of the paper and it doesn't look as nice. You want to just touch with the color and then you can layer over it a couple of times, but you don't want to overwork it and do too many layers in one spot. So when I do fur, just try and paint the edges kind of like individual hairs. I like to use kind of a sharp brush. It's the same technique you can use for painting grass or anything that's kind of like fuzzy or furry looking. So we just did an oops. I'm glad we did an oops because now I can show you what to do with an oops. We've got a little bit of Payne's Gray where we don't want our Payne's Gray. So we're gonna take a piece of paper towel, dab off the spots where we splashed. You can take a little bit of color back. There we go. Look at that. We fixed it. Problem solved. Never panic. Just fix it fast. Especially with watercolor. The faster you lift it, the better it's going to work. To use Payne's Gray is because it is a dark color that has a lot of nuance to it. You'll find, if you look really close, I'll try and get a photo at the end of this to show you a bit more of the nuance that you get out of this color, because there's like little tiny patches where it'll turn more blue. It's got a lot of dimension to it, which is why I like it. For darks, I find if you use just a flat black like an ink, it doesn't look as deep when paired with colors. If you're going to use just flat black, if you're doing like black and white or if you're doing something monochromatic, it works really nice, but you want something with a lot of color in it. I find the Payne's Gray is the way to go. I'll end up with this very nice, rich, dark color in the spots where you want it dark, but where you dilute it, it'll be a very dimensional gray. Now, if you want more time to blend your colors, you can buy something called the blending medium, which slows down the drying time. That's also true for acrylic too. You can buy fluid that will slow down how fast it dries, which can come in really handy if you feel like you don't have enough time to finish working a piece. also use a brush. It's a bit cleaner. It doesn't have to be as clean, but just kind of rinse it off and dry it off a little bit, and you can come back in and pick up if you feel like you've put too much color in one spot. I'm probably going to do it just a smidge. We're also going to add a very light gray wash to our cat's ears. I put pink underneath it so it'll look like there's a touch of that pink shining through, kind of like when sunlight hits a cat's ears. Might go back in and add a little bit more. We'll see how it looks once it's dry. You can layer colors. So if you want a bit of blue to shine through or a bit of purple underneath, paint that on the underlayer. Alright, and we're back to do our last paint layer. So we're going to touch up anything that we feel isn't looking the way we want it to. We're also going to add in this little piece of fabric that this cat is sitting on. Now I want that eye color to come out a little bit more. I'll go back in with that blue green. Any spots that didn't turn out as dark as we wanted them to on the first pass. It's actually turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. And the next step that we need to do is inking, which you want to let it dry good in order to ink it. I usually wait until the next day. I tend to draw or paint before bed, and I ink in the morning. Ink while you're drinking your coffee. Paint after you've had your whiskey. Now, the thing about painting pet portraits or anything emotional, it's kind of, you want to evoke emotion when you have people look at it, and color is a way to do that. Colors make people feel things, and you can probably find tons of videos on color theory, but colors go together, colors behave in a certain way together, and they make people feel things. You probably have a favorite color. My favorite colors are turquoise, purple, pink. I just noticed a little oopsie creeping in there. Look at that. See, I accidentally touched a wet spot with the dark, which I shouldn't have done. No matter. That's the type of problem we can fix. Everything's a problem we can fix. That's the nice thing about painting, is it's usually pretty easy to do that kind of thing. We'll let that dry, and when we come back, we'll touch up that little spot, and you won't even notice that it's there. Now, drying time. Back later. Okay, so it's the next day. It's the morning after. I've let our painting dry overnight, which means that it is ready to be inked. It's usually a good idea to let your painting dry as long as possible before touching it with a pen, so that way it doesn't bleed everywhere. So, I am working with a Micron pen. This is a Graphic 1, so it's a nice thick pen with a sharp tip. And we're gonna go in and make everything that I want it to be black. Now when I ink, I turn my work around, and I like to give more of like the hair texture as I'm inking. So you'll see, especially on a black cat, you just kind of add in a little bit of fur texture. Now normally when I ink, I take this over onto the couch on a clipboard. It's really actually, I find it a bit of a struggle to ink flat on a desk. I've never been good at it. I might do better if I had an angled desk. I do have a light table that I will sometimes use for that purpose, but for the most part, I just like a good old clipboard. what bring a painting to life. So I always like to put back in a few highlights. You can always come back in with a paint pen and do it after, but the white of the paper does the job, and then you don't have to struggle to cover a dark color with a lighter color. It's always easier to cover a light color with a darker color. And my paintings always look really spooky until the last minute because I always do the eyes pretty much close to last, as close to last as possible. So it always does end up looking a little bit funky until we get those in place, because it doesn't look like it has life until there's eyes. About Micron pens is if you're not happy with something, you can go over them with some paint afterwards. So I'm not quite happy with that blue-green color. I want a little touch more of the blue. So we're gonna go back in and just give it that, which you can do if you used a Micron pen. If you used a Sharpie and you want to go back over something, I would recommend using instead of watercolor, use a water-based marker or use a colored pencil. There's no reason why you can't mix media this however you want. I just like to rough them in and then come back in with a second line of it so it looks nice and bright. Like this, it's pretty forgiving. If you screw it up, it's easy enough to go back in and touch it back up and fix anything that looks a little bit hinky, a little bit off kilter. You can paint over it, you can touch it up. Last couple of finishing touches, we're just going to touch up what's going on in the eyes here. I'm pretty happy with how this is doing, so we're gonna do our last task of the day, which is signing our artwork. I sign using my initials intertwined and the year, but you can sign it however you want. And here we go. We have a completed pet portrait in watercolor. Very simple technique. We'd love to see yours, so please send a link in the comment if you decide to follow this tutorial. I want to see it. Have a good one.